Welcome to the Online for Authors podcast. I'm the founder, Jennifer Palmer. Today I am pleased to welcome Teri M Brown as our guest host. Teri is an author herself and is considering if a podcast of her own is a fit for her. Until then, we're happy to have her with us. Teri's guest is a former physician and an author of Cold War spy thrillers who got the bug for writing in 7th grade. His English teacher gave the class an assignment to write a short story on any subject. William Maz was born in Bucharest, Romania, of Greek parents and immigrated to the U.S. as a child. During his high school and undergraduate years, he developed a passion for writing fiction. William divides his time between homes in Pennsylvania and New York City and is now writing full-time. His mission is to use fiction writing to ask some of the larger questions that interest people everywhere. How does the world function? What is the best way to spend our lives? And why do people and countries do what they do? And the ultimate question, is there something more than this life?
Hi, we'd love to welcome William Maz to Online for Authors. He's written the Bucharest Legacy. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so why don't you give our listeners just a really quick summary as to what the Bucharest Legacy is about?
Well, thank you. The Bucharest Legacy is a sequel, but it's a standalone sequel to the Bucharest Dossier, which came out last year. The Bucharest Legacy just came out a couple of months ago. The first book is about a CIA agent named Bill Heflin, who is tasked to go to Bucharest, Romania, in December of '89, just before the Romanian Revolution starts. And he is a unique agent that he has a KGB mole named Boris that seems to be a puppeteer in his life, knows everything about the revolution before it starts and about Heflin's life. The book is like a Matryoshka doll, a love story inside of a spy thriller, inside of a historical novel. And the history is very accurate in terms of what happened in the revolution. If you go to Romania today, they still don't know whether this was a revolution or a coup d'etat. Mm-hmm. And I give the answer to that in my book, based on all the facts that I've gathered. The second book takes place 3 years after the revolution, in 1993. It starts out with Heflin having to exfiltrate a KGB defector from Bucharest, who turns out has a very important story to tell. He divulges that there is a mole inside the KGB, inside the CIA, and that the handler of the mole is none other than Boris. What that does is it puts the CIA's hair on fire, because that means that all these years, Boris has been feeding them false intelligence. And not only that, but if he's running a mole, Heflin is the prime suspect.
Right.
Now, Heflin's boss doesn't believe that is the case. He trusts Heflin, so he gives him a chance to find Boris and clear his name. And when he goes to Bucharest, where Boris was last seen, he finds that the KGB is also after Boris. Not only that, but there is a whole new class of people, very wealthy oligarchs, who are also after Boris for different reasons. What nobody knows, and what only Heflin knows, is that Boris has been dead for over a year. So I divulged that at the beginning of the novel, right. So it's not a spoiler. So what I wanted to do with the second book is depict through the spy thriller genre, which allows you to do a lot of things while keeping the action and the pace going quickly. Mm-hmm. It allows you to depict a part of history and show people what it was like. In this case, as in most of the other communist countries, by the way, a new class of oligarchs was formed. And I try to show how they were formed and what they were involved in, which I hope we can discuss, because it is,
Absolutely.
yeah, because it is very up to date right now with the oligarchs in Russia. But the point I want to make is that Russia is not unique. There are
Hmm.
oligarchs in almost all of the former communist states.
Exactly. What prompted you to write about Romania, the oligarchs, all that's going on? What is it that is your connection with this?
Well, I was born in Romania, like the
Hmm.
character, of Greek parents who had
Okay.
emigrated to Romania while Romania was a democracy with a king between the First and Second World War. And at that time, Romania was quite wealthy. It had oil. The earth was very fertile. It was the breadbasket of the area. And there was a lot of industry and so forth. Poor Greeks, like my grandparents, went there to start restaurants, like poor Greeks do everywhere. So and then my parents met there, and then they couldn't leave. After World War II, Romania became communist,
Hmm.
and because it was invaded by the Russians. And my brother and I were born there, and we couldn't leave for decades until, for some reason, we're allowed to. We lived in a refugee camp for 2.5 years in Athens, in a restored military compound with an
Hmm.
outdoor toilet and everything else. And then came to the United States. My father's a doctor. They needed doctors. So that's how we were allowed in.
Very, very interesting. There's a little bit of you in the character. Some
There's
of
a
the
lot.
things you're talking about, I kind of see some connections there.
Well, this brings up the question of how much of your own story do you tell? It's not a memoir by any means.
Right.
So you use little bits and pieces that fit your story. So I went to Harvard, but I was never approached by the CIA.
Right.
There was a Pusha, a little girl that I left behind when I was 6, but everything else is fiction. I never saw her again.
Right.
So you start using parts. I mean, in Romania, I went back maybe a dozen times over 15-year period. I saw I have a lot of relatives there. So I saw the lives they were leading under Ceausescu and the Ceausescu regime, at the communism, the food lines, which I describe a lot more in the first book, the Securitate, which is the intelligence agency of
Hmm.
the Romanians, how they were spying on everybody. I'm sure I was spied upon. My relatives were questioned after I left regarding what we talked about. I'm sure I have a dossier somewhere because they haven't released them, at least not all of them. I wanted to show this part of history, which hasn't been described in fiction. There are a couple of history books about the revolution, but I think a lot of Americans don't know much about it, and they don't know
It's
where
true.
Romania is. It's right next to Ukraine, by the way.
Hmm.
It was, before communism, a very wealthy and a country that produced a lot of writers, UNESCO and others. And so um, it really is a crime that 40 years of its history was lost to.
Because you wanted to write about Romania and this portion of their history, what prompted you to kind of go into the spy thriller genre as opposed to maybe just a straight historical fiction or just a straight love story or a straight, you kind of did that combination, which I loved. I mean, I really loved the book. I'm curious what pushed you that way versus something else.
Well, first of all, I'm a Jean Le Carre lover and of spy novels in
Okay.
general, but not the Mission Impossible type, where there's a ticking bomb and you have to stop it before it reaches zero, or there's a virus you have to stop. That's one end of the
Right.
spectrum, right? The other end is Jean Le Carre. My books are close to the Jean Le Carré end, although they have a lot more action than his books do. But it's mostly a thinking person's book. You want to find the puzzle. You want to find
Right.
the answers, and you think you have it, and then
you don't.
you don't.
Right. I loved that. Do you personally read any other genres, or do you pretty much stick to just reading spy thrillers?
Oh no, I started out. I wanted to be a writer since I was in 7th grade. Mrs. Garbutt's class, English class, where she asked us to write a short story. I did, and the class stood up and applauded, and I was hooked. I love writing. And I survived medicine by writing every night, trying to write short stories. I wrote my first novel when I was in medical school, believe it or not. I didn't have enough to do, right?
Right.
But it saved my life, really. It gave me an outlet, and it made me think about other more important things than my grades or whatever, although they were good. I'm not saying they were very good. I actually graduated magna cum laude from Harvard, but still, it's all a rat race that I wanted to have a little, sacred time at the end of every evening where I could write my thoughts.
What was for you?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Prior to these books coming out, these two, did you have anything else published prior to this?
No, I know. Okay. I was trying to write while I was studying medicine, while I was practicing medicine. That it's just isn't enough time. The book I finished in medical school, I finally got it to Knopf with an agent while I was a resident. Knopf loved it, but they wanted me to change practically the whole ending. And I said to them, look, I'm awake 36 hours a day. I cannot think. I cannot write for the next 3 years.
Right.
And that was the end.
That was that. Yeah. So what then prompted you to finally decide now's the time? You've wanted to do it since 7th grade, and you're obviously not 7th grade anymore. So why now? I
decided, during my practicing years, I was taking a lot of courses with Gordon Lish. I took a course for 1 year. I don't know if people know who Gordon Lish was, but he was a famous editor who discovered several actors. He used to have private lessons for 6 hours straight once a week.
Wow.
In a private apartment. You could write a whole novel about that. So when I was learning the craft, as they say. And again, when you're practicing, it's just like medical school. You don't have a heck of a lot of time.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
So finally, when I was turned 54, I decided, I'm either going to do it now or never. So I left medicine. I don't have any children. I don't have to pay for their college. So I decided to become a full-time writer.
Fantastic. Are you happy that you did? Was it a good decision for you?
The best decision I ever made. It's I'm writing every day for 6 or 8 hours, and I love it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You wanted to talk a little bit about this new class of people that kind of sprung up in Romania. Let's do that. What do you want these listeners to understand?
First of all, let's define what an oligarch is.
Mm-hmm.
The term goes back all the way to Aristotle. An oligarch is not just a wealthy person. Bill Gates would not be considered an oligarch.
Okay.
An oligarch is a wealthy person whose wealth depends on the king or the leader.
Okay.
So we've had oligarchs throughout Western history. They weren't called that. They were called earls and dukes and barons. And they were all part of the king's network that kept him in power. What did the king do? Well, if there was a political ally, or if there was a great general or a valiant warrior, he would give them a piece of land and would give them a title. And they say, okay, now this is called Essex, and you are an earl, you're the Earl of Essex. And in return, he would get loyalty, and he would get powerful people who had skin in the game. skin in his game, meaning they made it sure that he remained in power because otherwise they would lose their wealth and maybe their lives. So that was a way for the kings to prop themselves up. Now, believe it or not, even during communism, there was an oligarch system of sorts. Everything done during the communist regimes, all the apparatchiks who worked for the government were corrupt. They stole from the government coffers, okay? Whether they stole a little from the small guy in a teller, a teller in a window, or whether it was a minister of defense, they stole from the government. The ministers stole huge amounts, and they had their own offshore accounts. The biggest thief of all was Ceausescu, the leader himself, who had over $1 billion estimated in offshore accounts, which was never found, by the way. And I have a solution to that puzzle.
You do.
One of the things you learn about writing as you go into it is if you're going to write a historical novel, there are gaps in history.
Exactly.
And
that's where the fiction part gets to come in, right?
That's where the writer steps in.
Right.
So there was a gap in how the revolution started. I stepped into that one. There was a gap about Ceausescu's money. I provided that answer. And there's nobody around who can prove me wrong.
So I'm a historical fiction author as well. And I firmly believe that the history that you can know in a historical fiction needs to be as accurate as possible.
Yes, absolutely.
But that my characters who are made up, they're mine, they get to do what they want as long as it fits the historical background that they're in.
Absolutely right.
So
that's what that has been my mantra also. I have real characters in the first book and a couple of them in the second. For instance, there's a general, Stănculescu, who was eventually, before Ceausescu fell, became the defense minister. Well, after my research, I realized that Stănculescu was a CIA asset since 1985 or 86, I think it was. He was recruited in East Germany while he was attending a conference. Okay, so you start putting these things together and you realize that there's another story behind the story. There was another general who was a KGB asset who, after the revolution, confirmed that Gorbachev had planned on doing a coup for several years. He just never decided before the revolution. So there are a lot of things in history that, in your research that allows you to actually enhance your plot, enhance your book, just from doing the research. So let me go back to the oligarchs. So during Ceausescu's time, all these oligarchs stole. The Securitate, which was the dreaded secret police, had dossiers on all of them. The Stasi, which was the East German secret police, when the Germany's united, they found 111 kilometers of floor-to-ceiling dossiers on all their citizens, millions of them.
Wow.
Okay? So the Securitate in Romania, I'm sure, had at least as many because the population was greater. Ceausescu knew that all his minions were stealing, but he wanted it that way. He was creating his own entourage of oligarchs because his fate depended on them and their fate depended
on him. Right.
Okay. When did the new oligarchs form? Romania and all the other countries turned from communism to capitalism. The people in charge were still former communists. The leader who came after Ceausescu was Iliescu, who used to be his propaganda chief. And they had to privatize all of their state-owned companies, mines, banks, chemical factories, everything. During this privatization process, the whole system became very corrupt because they were supposed to do it in a democratic system. People are supposed to get papers reflecting the number of stocks, they had.
Right.
And that never happened. All of these things ended up in the hands of a few. Then you ask, who are these few? It turns out that they're all either present or former members of the Securitate itself. And why is that? Because of those dossiers. That's why I call the first book the Bucharest dossier. Everything in communist countries is based on your dossier, where all your information lies. Well, the Securitate had dossiers full of damning information, people stealing, all throughout the communist years. They used that to blackmail all the parliamentarians, the judges, everybody, so they can get what they wanted. And not only that, they also gave them kickbacks. They made them secret shareholders in the new companies and so forth. Some people have the idea that these oligarchs were somehow smarter than the government and stole these things. No, it was a symbiotic relationship. They were all in on it.
Yeah.
And they all became wealthy from it. And they continued to be, they continued to run the country. There is a quote by a Securitate agent who said, if Iliescu wins the next election, our job will be completed, meaning they will have gotten their hands on everything that they wanted. And he said, after that, it doesn't matter who is in power. We would control the country. And they do now. They control, most of the big industries, and most of them are faceless. These are all LLCs registered in Liechtenstein and Luxembourg, and nobody knows who actually owns them.
Right.
So that's how the oligarchs were formed. And this happened everywhere. They happened in Bulgaria and Albania. It happened except for places like East Germany, which didn't have a chance to do that because it was immediately joined with West Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Poland wanted to be better. They went through a very quick turnover to capitalism, but now Poland is creating its own oligarchs. And here's the thing I was trying to say. Oligarchs, like I said before, it's not just part of communism. It existed throughout history. And there are people presently in power who have created their own system. For instance, in Turkey, Erdogan has been in power for 20 years. Well, how? Well, it's been known that he's been giving no bid contracts to all of his friends and relatives, right? And it's been shown now with the tremors where all these houses fell that these people not only got no bid contracts, but they stole from them and created subpar structures that fell with the tremors. And also in Hungary, there you have a system they call an illiberal democracy. Viktor Orban is the leader who says outright, I'm creating oligarchs because I want capitalism to remain. I want people who are powerful to keep capitalism going. So his way of doing that is by creating a system of oligarchs, by the way, which is not such a stupid idea, because the part of the book that I'm explaining at the end is something about how the Romanian oligarchs were formed.
Fantastic. That was really that's a good lesson, because I think a lot of, like you said, Americans tend to know American history, maybe a little bit of English history, and there's a lot of things that we don't know. I wrote a book about Ukraine starting in the 1970s and going forward. And a lot of the same kinds of things, this idea that, just because communism falls doesn't mean immediately you get a democracy that looks anything like a Western democracy, because who can go into power? The only people that are going to go into power are those who used to be in power. And they don't change their mindset just because you changed the name to democracy. It's they're going to do what they've always done with a different name. So,
well, if you look at the list of the most corrupt countries in Europe, these former communist states are always at the bottom. Okay, they're at the bottom because they retained their communist way of thinking. To this day, you can't get much done in these countries without the bakshish, it's called, the bribe.
Right.
Bakshish is a Turkish word because the Turks had invaded for 400 years. And so they have a lot of Turkish words. So the bakshish, you want anything done by a government official, you have to bribe them. And so Ukraine was, for instance, one of the most corrupt countries before the war, before the invasion. And in fact, recently he had to get rid of his defense minister because of corruption.
Exactly.
What kind of a patriot is that guy when he's stealing money from the Defense Department? And by the way, the analysts at the CIA think that the reason Russia finds itself so weak militarily is because the military generals and all those guys have been stealing from the military budget, and they're creating villas in Monte Carlo and yachts. It's a hollow army.
Right. My husband is a 25-year military veteran. And he talks about that all the time. He says, they're being told, yes, all that money that you sent to build tanks, et cetera, but what you're actually seeing are tanks that don't run and et cetera, because that money has been used by the people who were supposed to be turning it over. So,
and there's also the idea that a tyrant puts weight on loyalty, not on competence. So a lot of these people who are loyal are not necessarily the most competent generals or the most competent bureaucrats, and we've seen this in our own our own politics, where loyalty is prized more than competence, and that is very tragic because you can see what's happening in Russia. They don't produce anything in Russia worth buying other than oil. It's what John McCain used to call, a gas station with atomic bombs. That's what Russia is. It's 80% of its income comes from fossil fuels, and natural resources. So there's no Apples in Russia. There's no Microsofts.
Exactly.
So I wanted also to show people that the Cold War never left. Okay, everybody for the past 30 years, all the propeller heads on television have been telling us the Cold War is over. And I've been telling them, no, it is not. It is simply dormant. Now they're saying, oh, the Cold War is back. And again, they're wrong. I said,
and
no.
William says, no, it never left. Right.
And I'm trying to remind people what the Cold War was like, what communism was like, because again, you have idiots who know nothing. These are armchair communists who know nothing about communism. They used to be actors and writers in Hollywood, in the 50s with the McCarthy era, that were communists. They know nothing about communism, what life was like under. They read Marx, and if you read Marx, it sounds pretty good. All for one, one for all. You give what you can, you receive what you need.
It's very pretty on paper, but it doesn't work out that way, because there are people in power who are greedy, and the all for one and one for all never works out. It turns out to be all for me and you get nothing, and that's just what happens. It's too much human nature.
That's right. You can't change human nature. And what happened with the industries in Romania, I told you, it was the breadbasket of the area. Once they made collective farms, they took away the private farms and put everybody on collective farms. Nobody worked.
Right.
Why am I going to work for the government? Blah, blah, blah.
I'm going to get the same thing whether I work or not.
And exactly, because communism guaranteed you a job for life.
Right.
It couldn't fire you. Nobody worked. They worked half days and they were drunk half the time. And so production went downhill, both in the farms and in everything else. How could they guarantee everybody a job? Well, because they overstaffed everything. Okay. So when the privatization came and these companies had to become profitable, they fired half the staff.
Right.
So Romania, the first several years, 3, 4, 5 years after the revolution, had a 45% unemployment rate. People never heard of an unemployment. I mean, they never got used to, they were never used to looking for a job
Right.
or having no job. It was a very tumultuous period. In fact, some people wanted to go back to the communist days. They would say, well, it was a miserable job, but at least it was a job.
Exactly.
In a sense, you could make the argument, though I don't agree with it, that the oligarchs provided a stability. They provided companies, for instance, that became efficient and produced something. They brought in investments from the West and so forth. And they always compare themselves to the Rockefellers and the Carnegies of our period. They say, oh, those guys didn't steal? You got to be kidding me. Of course they did, one way or another. Today you have your people giving legal bribes to your politicians through campaign contributions. So how is that different? And they have a point. But there it was and continues to be brazen. I mean, it's just money laundering and extortion. It's not there's no subtlety to it.
I'm curious, when you finished book number 2,
yes,
you did so in a way that I firmly believe a book number 3 is going to happen. Is that correct?
It's correct. I'm working on it right now. And it's I will give you a hint. It doesn't just take place in Romania, but in Russia.
Okay. All right. Do you have a name for it yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because when it ended, I knew it was like, oh yeah, he's left this open so much for another one. How do you have any idea in your mind how long you want this series? Is it going to be 3? Is it going to be 6? Do you have?
It all depends on a lot of things. My publisher, how successful they are. I got a movie option contract now.
Ooh, how exciting is that?
And guess who it is with? It was Cody Gifford, Kathy Lee Gifford's son.
Wow.
He has become a producer now, and so he loved the book. He came to us, and so I was very happy about it. He bought the series. He says, I want at least 3 because I want to sell it as a kind of a Born Identity or Mission Impossible type of thing, right?
Right.
So we'll see if it ever gets done. I mean, you know how it is.
Right.
Companies buy scripts all the time, and only half of them are being made. But Cody just emailed me saying the script is done. So
how exciting!
I'm excited.
Yeah, that is. Wow, that's really fabulous. I mean,
you see me on the red carpet, when the movie opens.
I could say I knew him when. No, I think that's wonderful. So do you have any idea when this 3rd book is going to come out? I would think probably, well, it's not finished yet. And it takes a year from the time it's finished. So it'll be a year and a half at least. Okay, wonderful. Do you have any other ideas for writing? Like, have you considered other avenues?
The other half of me is the scientific medical half.
I was going to ask that because there's a lot of those like medical thriller type. Would you do a thriller again and do the medical thriller? Is that kind of what you'd be thinking? One has already been written. Fantastic.
One of the books I wrote before I did the Bucharest dossier is a book that my agent is hopefully going to try to publish within the next few months, try to sell within the next few months. It'll come out the next few months. But it is a Michael Crichton type of scientific medical thriller. It's not about people dying in a hospital. It's a higher idea than that. But I won't tell you about it.
Okay. That's all right. I know you can't divulge everything, but when you said that you had been a doctor, I thought that's surprising that you went with the spy and not with the medical, because you obviously would have a lot of the medical knowledge to.
Well, let me tell you quickly how that happened. It'll only take a minute. It started out as a love story. Okay. The young man finding his love that he left 20 years ago.
Right.
Then I'm asking myself, this is how a book is written, by the way. I'm asking myself, well, how does that happen? Why has he waited 20 years? And why is he going back now? Well, what if I put them during the revolution? Because he's afraid of what might happen to her, whatever. And then I think, well, why would he be stupid enough to go back during a revolution? I mean, really? Well, he's got to be a CIA agent. He's wanted there by somebody. Who? Well, he's got to have an asset. And this is how it grows.
Exactly. No, I know exactly what you mean, because I wrote Sunflowers Beneath the Snow. That's about 3 generations of Ukrainian women. And I knew my end, because it is based on a true story. This end is just a little piece of someone's story, but I needed to create something to get there. And that's the same thing I did was, well, how would they have ever gotten here to do that? Well, then they had to have been there, but what made them go from there to here? Well, let's see, it must have been. And so you do that same thing. And I love that.
That is the beauty of writing for me. They always ask me, are you a pantser or are you an outliner? And the people who don't know, a pantser is a writer who lives by the seat of their pants. And because they don't know what they're writing about when they start writing. I'm not like that. Although Stephen King says he is, I don't believe a word he says. He does all the planning in his head. What I do is I know certain scenes are going to be in the book. I don't know the ending necessarily. Okay, I mean, in the revolution, the ending that the Ceausescu shot. But by the way, you can see the trial and the execution of Ceausescu on YouTube.
Wow.
You can find a lot of things.
You sure? Yeah.
It's amazing. So a few things. The ending, maybe. Maybe the climax and a few other scenes, but you don't know how you're going to get there.
Right.
And in the book, you don't just have one plot. I have 3, right? And the love story, the spy story, and the revolution story. These 3 have to be intertwined. You can't just float them on their own. So these characters intertwine. And one of the things I learned early in my writing courses, you have a graph where in the second act, it's all based on a 3-act play by Aristotle. In the second act, when the protagonist starts meeting obstacles, each obstacle has to be bigger than the last one. And there's a graph of tension where they overcome the first obstacle, tension comes down, there's a trough. That's where you put the peaks of the second plot, so that there is excitement there, but not from the first plot. There's excitement from the second plot. And so you time your peaks to be in the troughs of the first plot. And then the same thing with the third plot. Wherever there's a little dead time, that's where you put the peaks of the third plot. And so you learn a lot from taking courses from different people. So
yeah, you definitely do. You obviously did a ton of research.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you can't have written what you wrote without doing research. Do you enjoy that aspect of the writing as well?
I love it. First of all, I did research by interviewing people because I was there 2 months before the revolution, and I was there 4 months after the revolution. And I had been there for years before visiting. But a lot of the revolution research had to be, online. So I probably read hundreds of papers written about it, articles, 2 books. And after a while, you get such granular detail that you can't put it all in the book.
Exactly. So you have to pick which things are going to make your book do what you need your book to do.
Well, exactly. They have to help the book. Okay.
Right.
In the end, your loyalty is to the book, but you should never make the facts wrong. But how many facts you include and which ones they are chosen to help your book. So I had to show some of the killing and so forth. But this is not a book about violence. This is a book about showing how the people lived, about showing the craft and the thinking behind what CIA agents actually do. You talk to a CIA agent, they said, I never carry a gun. The time I need to carry a gun, it means my mission is blown and I have to get out of there.
Right.
So it is not how most CIA agents function. So all of the stuff you see in the movies. There is a unit now in the CIA, a couple of units that are black units that have been brought on board after the Cold War when the terrorist era came. And they are military units inside the CIA, which do go and assassinate terrorists, okay? Or they help, or they combine with Green Berets or other people to do that. But that's not what a spy is. A spy is there to run his assets and get information.
Right.
You know? And that's what.
And that's rarely done with a gun.
Right, exactly. When the gun is there, it means I'm blown. I got 24 hours to get out of here.
Right, right. Well, I love that you love research. I have a hashtag called Research Junkie. And that's what I call myself, because I love delving in. And I know that 95% of what I learn is never going into anything that I write, but it helps me pick and choose those things that are going to elevate my book or move me forward in a way that will help people maybe see something they wouldn't have known otherwise. And I love it when I'm able to find a piece of information that ties everything together for me. It's like, that's what I've been looking for. That's the reason that they could do this, or that's how I'm going to get him from Ukraine to England, or that's how, and then it works.
And then you have an aha moment, or you get a rush of adrenaline or whatever you have, because it's a beautiful moment. And not only that, but the more you know about that whole period, or whatever period you're writing about, the more it comes out subconsciously in your writing and in your dialogue. And it seeps through that you have deep knowledge of what you're writing about.
Exactly.
And so it helps to do a lot of great research. It's my favorite. Well, it's not my favorite, but it's a favorite part of writing, is doing the research.
I tell people that I really enjoy doing historical fiction because it merges the two things I love the most, which is research and writing. And I get to do both of them. And like I said, I get a real charge out of finding those facts that are going to really move the story along. So yeah, this is a lot of fun talking to someone else who understands that.
Well, the danger is, and I've fallen into this, that you love your research so much that you never start writing.
Exactly. You have to, I tend to, people have asked me like, well, how do you do your research? I do some before I start writing, and then I do research throughout as I'm writing, because I now need to know something. I've gotten to a point where I now need to figure out, how am I moving? And so I do a little more research. And as soon as I know, I back off the research and I start writing again. Because like you said, you can jump down rabbit holes and come up 3 years later and realize you've not done anything but research. So
well, I always say I do research like the CIA functions, on a need-to-know basis. Because I wanted to know, what gun did the KGB use in the 1980s? Well, you can actually find out online. It was the Makarov. I mean, what was the weather like in December of '89 in Bucharest? You can find that out.
I know. Isn't it awesome?
It is.
Yeah. So I have I think it's 1990 in my book, where it's like one of the worst winters in Ukraine. And I used that information to explain what was happening and to really show the depths of depravity that were going on at that point, right? But I could do it because I looked up, what is the temperature, in January? And it was like, oh my gosh, we can use this. You read this little blip, coldest winter in, 60 years or whatever. And it was like, oh, I can use that.
That's right.
I feel really blessed to be in an age where you have this online ability to do this research, where you can find things like what was the temperature in January of, 1989 in you name the country.
And Kafka wrote America without ever having been to America. And he got some things wrong there. Well, I can write about Russia without ever having gone to Russia, because it's all in front of me on film and newspapers. I mean, I read a lot of articles in Romanian because I can speak the language. English is my third language, in fact.
Wow.
And Romanian, then Greek, then English. I read all these Romanian descriptions of the people killed in the town of Timișoara, where the revolution started, and the tanks rolling over them and all of this stuff. which is very tragic. Over
Exactly.
2,000 people died. Research is great, but then you stop and then you throw away 90% of it probably.
But like you said, you
don't
don't
throw it.
necessarily put it in the book, but it does seep out
Yeah.
because it you're able to use what you know to write something very realistic. Because even if you don't state it specifically, your character is now living it, and people see that through their eyes. I love that. One of the things that I noticed is you have a wide vocabulary. I had to look up a few words, which is great. I absolutely love that. Do you consider yourself a lover of words? I mean, if you speak 3 languages, I'm assuming that you
Yes,
love language.
especially, well, that's right, because Romanian is the closest to Latin, sometimes even closer than Italian, because the
Okay.
Romans were the original invaders of Romania. And the language is mostly Roman, Romantic language. It is an easy language to learn. There aren't the difficult grammar that you find in French or Dutch or German. And in fact, my publisher had me cross out a few words.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they said, you don't need this. This is a spy thriller. I said, it's an intellectual spy thriller. Oh,
Well, so I love to keep a little tab of words that I've not heard before. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I didn't grow up in a home that had a large vocabulary. And so I'm often hit with words that I've never heard of. And so I always find it exciting. And I had a list, I think I had 7 words that I went through, and it was like, I don't know what that one is. And so I would look it up, and I have my list, and I use those now. I don't necessarily use them in everyday speech, but I know what they are now. And I loved that. So thank you for that.
Thank you. The problem I have is I used to have a list like that, and it's a big book. Okay. And then you go back when you can't remember a word, and you realize, oh my God, I had it on my list like 5 years ago.
Right. Well, that happens with age. So for you, do you feel like for the book, the type of book that you write, is character development more important, or is setting development more important?
Character is the most important in whatever genre you write.
I believe that. Yeah.
People care about character. That's why AI is never going to be a great writer.
Right.
Because they're not, they can mimic, they can whatever. But character is very important. And you have to know how to develop your characters so that you don't do a data dump, like they say young writers do, which is they tell everything about a character at the beginning because they want to create a rounded character. No, you got to let the information out slowly as you need to. Okay. Right. And the backstory doesn't come in the first, chapter. It slowly comes out as the story progresses. In a thriller and in most books, the first scene, and I write in scenes because I grew up with television and movies. The first scene has to be an action scene or some sort of dramatic scene.
Right.
To grab the reader. Okay. And because where does that come from? Well, a long history of readers going to bookstores and picking up a book, opening the first page and reading a little bit, and then deciding, do I want to buy the book or not? So you got to grab the reader in that first page. Now with Amazon, I guess you have that chance, but not really. It's not the same experience, right? If you give it to an agent to, look at in case they want to represent you, they will throw the manuscript away if they don't like that first paragraph or the first page. I mean, They don't read the whole thing. They don't have time. You have to make your first chapter powerful and intriguing. Now, you look at a James Bond movie, they always start with an action scene. And it's usually from a previous mission. It doesn't have anything to do with the present mission, but they have to include it there to grab you.
Pull you in. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
A lot of tricks that writers and movie makers use to grab you.
How can listeners get in contact with you if they would love to know more or keep up with what's coming up next?
WilliamMaz.com is the website. I put your name on the list, and I send emails out every few months. I'm not going to bombard you with them.
Wonderful.
And over there is a listing of where I appear, because I appear also in person. I was just in Chappaqua, New York. I'm going to be in Scarsdale, New York, and a few other places. I was down in Arizona. So part of the book coming out is traveling, but most of the things are on Zoom now.
And is there something you'd love to tell people?
One of the things that I do sometimes is even give a course on writing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I started to go into it a little bit here about how you do certain things. I mean, how you plot, how you create character, what a 3-act play is, and
Mm-hmm.
how do you manage it, and so forth. So I usually like to combine the two so that people can actually get some knowledge out of writing. How do you write at the same time that they hear about the book?
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today. I enjoyed getting to know you. And if you ever are in North Carolina, that's where I am.
Okay.
Let me know that you're in the area, and we will find a way to have lunch together.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
It was nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, and share. And we always love reviews. Until next time, thanks for listening. Thank you, Visibility Pod, for all your services and management of our podcast.